So Node 4's your recent Future of Hybrid Cloud report. I think the one of the main findings is that in general, people seem fairly happy with their experience of the public cloud for various reasons. Is that right?
Yeah, I don't think that's much of a surprise, is it? I think there's been a big movement, a shift in the market, obviously with customers moving to public cloud platforms. So yeah, on the whole, I think yeah, that's still obviously the direction of travel for customers, trying to take advantage of the public cloud. Lots of good reasons, people trying to drive cost savings and improving their security posture, and just the general agility and access to new technologies. So yeah, that was what the theme. And actually, I think what kind of surprised me a little bit was that out of the 302 people we interviewed, 99% were already running an application on AWS, Azure, or GCP. So yeah, there's still a level. I think we were just trying to find out where it was in terms of that curve, and have we got in a bit of a what's that trajectory, and is that going to continue? I think that's one of the things we were trying to find out. So
yeah, perhaps as you say, that maybe not the most surprising results, but one that maybe is a bit more surprising is that you also found out that I think a significant amount, half or so of companies you talked to had gone to the public cloud with a particular application and then for various reasons decided to migrate it back away. So in terms of the reasons that might be, there's a variety. I mean, cost, I think, was one of them. You tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's the reason we commissioned the report and tried to interview all these different people was that we were seeing a kind of a change. There's still that drive to public cloud, and we were starting to, because Node 4 worked for data centers, we've got a big public cloud practice. We've made an acquisition of a strong MSP partner of Visual as well. So public cloud is a big part of what we do. But because we are helping customers with data centers, we've got different hosting, we're right in the thick of it. So we're a bit of a Swiss Army knife. So we don't really mind. We want to get the best for the customer. So cost and public cloud is a really interesting thing, because like I said, there was over a quarter of people were saying that they've moved to the public cloud for cost savings, but then 50+ % of people have moved the workload back off because of cost savings to bring it back off the public cloud. And I think there's definitely an understanding that obviously an organization's got lots of different applications and nothing's the same. It's not a cookie cutter approach, and it is a very much, I think customers are taking a very pragmatic view to a horses for courses mentality of looking at their estate and using the public cloud for what it is, a tool for innovation to drive agility. But it can be expensive if you've got a workload that is just on VMs that's maybe quite a sizable estate. It doesn't really want to benefit from that consumption billing, so you can't really turn it off. You're not really getting that scaling functionality. It can work out more expensive. So I think certainly like we find half of the response of pull back an application back off, which isn't surprising as well, really, because you test things, you try it. And I think if you're in the thick of moving customers to public clouds and helping out with strategy, you realize that it's not a one size fits all solution. And all customers are trying to find that optimized approach for managing their IT infrastructure. So yeah, that we found out lots of reasons for moving workloads back off. And again, it is really common sense, really, when you look at it. Things like, performance problems with, let's say we've got, you have customers that they have a database and it's like wrapped in cotton wool, and they've thrown resources at it. No one's ever, optimized a query or an index. You pick it up, you throw it on a public cloud platform where you don't really have that insight into what's going on under the hood, and it's very expensive for all that compute, and no one's modernized it. Then it can be really painful to support, because you lose the transparency. It's expensive, and it's where we've had people in the past that have done big lift and shift migrations and not really thought about modernizing the workloads, it can be quite painful. And I think that just goes with the territory that, you know, you've got to modernize really to take advantage of public cloud, or if you don't, you get hit with, you know, general issues of trying to run more of a kind of traditional approach on a cloud native platform. So yeah, a number of reasons really.
Just on the cost thing, I mean, I'm not saying the cloud companies are dishonest, but is it a classic case of, you know, the headline price they're offering for a particular service? People might go, wow, that's amazing. But then when you actually need to make it sort of enterprise fit and that, you know, add in everything that you would have on-prem, is that one of the reasons things get expensive? Or is it just, as you say, because
I think you can get cost savings if you modernize and really take a bit of a programmable approach to it. So if you use it in the essence of what it's built for, then yeah, you can absolutely drive cost savings 100%. But I think if you try, look, a really good example is that you know, certain cloud providers offer like VMware service, for example, where you can recreate VMware on the host within a public cloud environment. And to do that, you need a lot of infrastructure, and you kind of locked into a minimum amount. And the way that you work in a cloud environment is that you have to get a really aggressive price or a competitive price, you have to lock it in for a 3-year kind of like instance period. And then it's not always easy to exchange it or cash it in. So what you'll find is that customers like try and do a big evacuation of a data center and keep the legacy tools, but then they find themselves stuck with a cost for 3 years that in theory on paper you could credit it or exchange it, but because of the value and the minimum amount to support it, you kind of get, you know, you get stuck a little bit, you know, so you end up doing what you did on site with maybe 5 hosts that you bought on CapEx, and now you're in a kind of high expensive rental model. So I think people just, there's, you know, where people have been reactionary and not really understood, and a lot of customers are moving into the public cloud for the first time, so they don't have the skills or understanding. They're coming from a traditional world and they're trying to recreate the traditional on and maybe that's not, you know, that's not always well, it's not the right approach really to do that. So I think the report shows that there is advantage if you do it properly and you modernize, great, all that great stuff. But if you have maybe not got applications or the time to modernize things that suit it, then yeah, it can be expensive and it cannot be, you know, the promised land maybe that you're expecting. So
okay, and just quickly as well, I mean, I'm just interested with things like service issues, capacity constraints. Do those crop up at all as you know, sort of unexpected problems with the cloud? Or?
I think it's still IT managed by people at the end of the day. And, you know, when you see companies like WhatsApp, Facebook, Snapchat, all these big, you know, software companies that have designed their applications for the cloud, and all of a sudden you get an outage, you know, there's something there, obviously, that you've got to understand that even in a very modern cloud native world with, you know, companies that have got massive IT teams, they recruit the best technical people, you still get issues. So I think what we're seeing in public cloud providers is that there's more, what I would say, global service issues. So a lot of companies will try and take a traditional approach to say, right, we need multiple data centers, multiple geographies, and if we do all that, then everything's great. But then you build on what you end up doing is taking the cloud provider services like DNS, authentication, and then what happens is an issue with that one of those services fails, which then affects all the regions. So that's an issue. And then obviously a few of the public cloud providers have had challenges with trying to manage capacity, especially post and during pandemic. So there's been more issues, and I think that's slightly passing, you know, with a combination of people having a big uptake and demand versus supply for infrastructure in the, you know, in the global market being a bit more constrained. I think there's not been specific issues, but there's been more stronger constraints about what people can launch and extend quotas and that kind of stuff. That has been a thing. So,
and it's so in terms of so you've got the situation where people have, as you say, maybe tried the cloud and for various reasons maybe withdrawn certain applications from it. But you've also then got people as a result, presumably of that experience with existing in-house infrastructure, or maybe they're using hosting companies deciding not to go to the public cloud as well.
Yeah.
So you've got sort of I'll call it a double whammy, whatever, sort of a couple of reasons why the public cloud isn't as popular as it might have been. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, I mean that's I think part of the reason for this report is because in my job I've got to look at the strategy for No4 and being out, having all the tools in the kit bag of where we think that customers are going to really need us to invest ahead of the curve and understand where we think the challenges are going to be for the next 3 years. So the report was really interesting. So it showed that I think 44% of people were still going to keep their own hardware for the next 3 years. And definitely, I think at the moment, half of them were running around half their applications in the public cloud on one of the big three providers. So if we roll that forward, we're in a world whereby customers have modernized the right applications to take advantage of public cloud, and they're running maybe 60-70% of their estate in public cloud, AWS, Azure, GCP. And then there's a group of applications that just don't make sense, or customers haven't got the time in the immediate future to modernize them in a proper way, or they're running them down, or they're looking at options. So customers are left with a challenge to say, right, we've got one or two different kind of modes of delivering infrastructure. We've got stuff in public cloud, we've got stuff on maybe a hosting company or on premise, and it's running maybe largely virtualized platforms like VMware. So the challenge that I think is emerging and that we're seeing is that that the headache for customers is trying to manage that. So how do you have different skills? How do you look at monitoring, security, governance, where you've now got more kind of different pockets and pools of infrastructure? So that was the challenge that we've really identified as how we help customers knit that all together in one kind of cohesive, easy to manage type, kind of service model, really, which I think is what the report really said to us, is that we're going to be in this hybrid state for the next 3 years. So, what are the challenges that customers are going to face in that world, really?
Okay, I mean, the traditional hybrid model, I guess, is sort of on-prem, private cloud, public cloud, and maybe a bit of colo chucked into the mix. But I think your report uncovered a sort of newish trend around, excuse me, I'm not sure I quite understand it, but the idea that public cloud provider sort of software is being used within end users' own IT estate. So can you explain that to me and our listeners?
Well, I think this is the really exciting bit, and that definitely, from our perspective, where we feel we can help customers. Because if you think about the public cloud as Microsoft, for example, really good example, we're a software company, now effectively a hosting company, but they're still building software at a massive rate, and all the new software is being released onto Azure. Now, what Microsoft have done, they've kind of identified the same. I think I was reading the Gartner report the other day, and Microsoft had kind of quoted on there saying that they're very much see the future as hybrid. So what they've done, they've done a couple of really interesting things. So there's a tool called Azure Arc. So Azure Arc is effectively an agent, or that you can put on VMware, AWS, or some of the Azure Stack HCI, which I can chat about it in a second. Well, that brings a lot of the software from Azure into the data center. So the challenge that we're trying to fix is, and the challenge that Microsoft is trying to fix is, how do you give one place for customers to manage their estate and manage it in a very with the most modern operating software you can get, but then understand that you've got some applications that might not suit being moved to that consumption model in a data center from Microsoft. So Arc allows you to integrate on-premise or hosted systems with Azure. So a really good example of that is if so we've launched a service that integrates Azure Stack HCI, which is a dedicated hardware cluster that can run on premise, or we've got it in our data centers. and that creates an Azure region. Effectively, it's like a custom location. So you register the cluster with Azure, it shows up in your Azure management pane, and then you can host all these bundle of applications that are left behind on premise on the Azure Stack HCI cluster, and then you run the Azure Arc to integrate it. So to stop talking techie in a amount of detail, what that actually means is that a user can go into Azure and launch a virtual machine, and you can pick and select it on your own management cluster and manage the virtual machine just as if it was in Azure, but it's actually running on your on-prem infrastructure that you've paid for with a hardware capex, and you've tuned the environment to meet all these hokey cokey applications, and you've got full visibility and operating into that. So it's AWS have got Outposts, slightly different model, and GCP have got an offering as well. It's Anthos, which is they're probably playing a little bit of catch up with Microsoft, but that's their main hunting ground, isn't it? Really, that kind of on-prem software model. So yeah, it's just phenomenal in terms of what I think's going to be happening in that area, definitely.
So in simple terms, if I understood it, they're taking, if you like, virtualization to another level, so that you got a one view, and what happens below that one view, in a sense, obviously you can pick and choose, but it doesn't really matter to you, the user, where things are happening, but you get a seamless view of Azure, whether it's on-prem or in the cloud. Well, yeah, whatever. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. So you manage the estate through the Azure management portal. So you need one set of skills, one set of dashboards, monitoring, backup, DR, governance, SIEM. It all sits within that Azure platform. But the workloads that you operate can be on-prem on your own hardware cluster. But you get that consistency that you've got one set of rules, one set of policies, one set of operation, one operating model. But for all this group of stuff that doesn't sit the kind of rent a service model in Microsoft data centers, you can have it on your own cluster and get it and integrate it. So I think that's going to be the solution, I think, to solving the headache of when customers have got different pockets of IT. That it's a good way to wrap your arms around it as an IT management kind of function, and just make sure you've got consistency of approach. So yeah, it's a really interesting development. I think now all that money and research that's been set into all the software is now coming back into the data center.
And I'm just interested, well, how does that is that compatible with, because again, there's talk about multi-cloud. I mean, I'm never quite sure how real that is, how practical it is for people to manage all manner of clouds, but is what you're describing compatible with people using multiple clouds, or was that a bit of a red herring anyway, and most people do decide on one particular flavor of cloud, and then everything else kind of streams down from there?
Yeah, I'm not sure multi-cloud was a red herring. I think it's just something that gets, if you're a really simple organization, you've got an application that's containerized and you can move it around all over the place, then yeah, you can spread your chips on different platforms. But most organizations have got quite traditional applications where you want to try and modernize it to a PaaS service, but as soon as you hit something like Azure App Service and Azure SQL, you can't go and recreate that on AWS, in a failover situation really easily. So I think you kind of get you want to take advantage of a new technology. So the difference with this approach is that you can run some of those PaaS services on your own infrastructure. So you can run app service functions, Azure SQL on your own kit. So you kind of like, if you think about SQL Server, it's like, right, it's almost like the latest version of SQL Server, but it's in a containerized PaaS service. It's a different model. I think it's just a different option for customers, and it's not been available. So people haven't, in the last, it's only just really come out this year in terms of the technology. So people have just naturally tried to spread their risk across different platforms. So I think that could definitely change if customers are, if a customer feels comfortable with being quite centric to, a kind of technology vendor.
And in terms of the end user looking at these options, a company such as yourself, I mean, you alluded to earlier, you're not particularly biased to any one particular thing, because you do most of it. Is that the right approach for most customers, to whether it's yourselves or another sort of managed service provider that can help them understand what applications belong where, and then also provide them the solutions? Is there a danger, as I say, if they go just to a public cloud provider or whatever, they might just push them in a particular route? So it's just what the end users need to be aware of and look for when when they're trying to sort out a strategy.
I think it is to just stay pragmatic and not get too carried away in the hype of things, and try and make sure that you make sensible decisions for your users, your customers, and the technology you actually run. A lot of customers want to be, some big, have got massive aspirations, and that's probably the right thing to do, but they're saddled with an IT environment that's going to take 5 years to try and modernize, and no one can do it that fast. So yeah, I would say the good news is that there are tools out there that, even if you have to, if you can't spread yourself too thick across too many platforms, but if you've got like a combination of 1 or 2 different modes or platforms, or 3 platforms, then there are tools that are emerging now that can help you knit that together to solve the challenges that you get. Because a lot of people will shove stuff into the public cloud because this last 20-30%, they don't want to leave it behind, but it maybe doesn't make sense, but they want to put it up there so it's nice and easy to have it all in one place. But I think there's just this emerging technology that just allows that challenge to be met head on, and just get the best of both worlds. So yeah, don't get caught up in the hype, but there are real benefits, and most customers have got a footprint in a public cloud provider. But for this, don't force it. If the application really isn't, there's not a business case to move it, then there are lots of ways you can make that cloud experience and meet the needs of some of these more awkward applications.
Okay, that's great. I mean, maybe just before we finish, turn of the year, without giving away any commercial secrets, anything we should be looking out for from Node 4 next year? Is it more of the same, or you've got some sort of exciting things that I say maybe you can't tell me about, but people should be looking forward to?
Yeah, well, we're in a really exciting place as a group now. So from a cloud perspective, we've launched this hybrid cloud service. So we've now got what we call hybrid regions, like UK Central and UK North, kind of, just to show that diversity. We've got them in our Leeds and Northampton data center, where customers can jump on an Azure Stack HCI service with Arc integrated for an Express route and Azure, and we've done. You can basically rent that knitted together model as a service. But if you look at us as a group, we've made acquisitions of over the last few years, and this year of kind of TMP, Visual, Tisky. We've kind of built this very strong end-to-end capability, especially in the Microsoft space, where we can cover everything from Business Central, Nav, Power Platform, Data AI, all the way through to how most people know us as a good old-fashioned colo provider, which to be honest is a big part of our business. But actually now we're very consulting heavy, business focused. So I think watch this space from a Node 4. 2023 is going to be a big year where we do hit a level of maturity and start bringing the story together for sure. It's very exciting.
Okay, that's great. Well, thanks very much for chatting to us today. Been some great insights. So Andy, thanks again.
No problem. Thank you, Phil.